You're listening to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series,
a dedicated series that explores all things net zero carbon and sustainability within the built environment.
Alongside some of the biggest names in property, we'll be delving into topics such as
why the market is pushing net zero carbon faster than legislation.
Is renovation and retrofitting better for the planet than new construction?
How can we balance sustainability concerns with profit margins?
And much, much more.
Don't miss any future episodes. Subscribe at placenorthwest.co.uk/subscribe or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Place Northwest's COP26 podcast series. I'm your host, Dan Whelan. Today's episode is sponsored by Unify Energy. Unify is the first licensed energy company to specialise in the end-to-end management of energy supply, distribution and billing to both landlords and their occupiers. Its unique suite of tools allows Unify to meet your energy needs like no other supplier in the industry. To find out more, email hello@unifyenergy.co.uk. There is so much noise around the sustainability debate that it is easy to get overwhelmed. It is time to get back to basics and look at how our behaviours can help to bring about change. Today, I am joined by Sarah Bateman, Chief Executive of Unify Energy, to talk about simplifying the road to net zero carbon. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. So let's get started. First of all, I think it would be good for our listeners to hear a little bit about Unify Energy and what it is you do and the service that you provide.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm obviously biased, but what Unify Energy is doing is really, really exciting. So we are the first fully regulated and licensed energy supply company in the country to offer a new and specialist product to landlords. So in the traditional kind of energy world, landlords will tend to be responsible for the energy supply to their multi-tenanted commercial building. And that causes a few problems because they essentially become a pseudo energy supply company. So they've got to think about how they're metering their customers, or maybe not. A lot of those landlords will typically bill their customers based on square footage. Those occupiers get a bit frustrated with that because they don't know how much they're using or whether the bill's really accurate. It's a bit difficult for the occupier, and it's also difficult for the landlord. They don't necessarily want to be in that position. There's also a bit of a disconnect between what a energy supply company is billing to the landlord and then what the landlord is able to bill out to the customers. Usually the landlord ends up picking up a little bit more than what they could or should. The alternative solution is that you have energy agents or metering agents companies that will come in and maybe put sub-meters into a building and take care of that billing process for a landlord. That will come at a cost to the landlord as well. And you've still got multiple areas that are disconnected. So you've got a different energy supply company supplying the main meter in the building, and then you've got a different company that you're contracting to help you manage the bit in the middle, and it's just not very connected. So what Unify Energy is the first supplier that does everything. So we're fully regulated, we hold an energy license, and we bring the energy into that main fiscal meter like any other supplier, but we also have a unique and proprietary system that we've developed ourselves, where we build essentially a hierarchy of meters in that building, where we can invoice all of the customers for that energy, manage those customers, manage all of that for the landlord end to end. And we're the only supplier that is basically offering that end to end solution. So it's really positive for landlords. They can kind of forget about all of that hassle, forget about that additional cost exposure, and know that they've got an end to end solution that's capturing all of that. And occupiers can be reassured that they're actually receiving an invoice from a regulated energy supply business, and they've got the benefit of having that direct relationship with an energy supply company and all of the processes that go along with that. So we're unique and we're new, and it's great.
Fantastic, excellent explanation. But it has been a tough time for energy providers of late, hasn't it? You know, we've all seen the news and the smaller energy providers going bust. How have you weathered that storm?
Yeah, it's been crazy, to be honest. And for anybody operating in this sector. It's been unsettling. Thankfully, we're really kind of operationally and financially robust. So this has not been any kind of existential threat for Unify Energy, and that's it's great, but it's also a moment to be really proud of, because we're not one of the bigger players in the UK. So the fact that we can be in this situation and be stable is kind of testament to kind of who we are as a business. And I think I really feel for customers that find themselves in a position where they suddenly have to find another energy supply company, and for those companies that have gone bust, in a lot of instances through no fault of their own. But it does highlight a bigger issue in the industry where if you're looking to sell commodity at low margins, at high volumes, to just kind of gobble up part of the market, it only takes a market event like what has occurred in the past week in the energy industry to really destabilize a business. And it's something that customers should think about when they're choosing who they pick as their energy supply company. Sometimes the price is not the only indicator.
Okay, what should they be looking at?
So I think there's a whole host of things. You want to look at the service that you're going. What's important to you, for energy. It might be that it is the cheapest price, and you don't mind changing suppliers if something goes wrong. I appreciate organisations will be in that situation. You might want to buy into a supplier that can help you with more than just energy supply. So in the case of Unify Energy, we will supply energy, but we will also help people understand ESG, how they get to net zero, understanding their invoice, reducing, what they're using. And obviously our specialist area is offering that whole package to a landlord who can then actually offer that support to all of the occupiers in that building. And multi-tenanted commercial buildings, I like to call them the forgotten customers. They're quite often forgotten about because they've got no choice but to just take this slice of energy from their landlord. It's the occupier can't change that. The landlord can't do that. It's largely the way infrastructure works in the UK. Ofgem have brought out a lot of rules around micro business customers. So these are categorized as small customers, basically, and there's more rules and more protection for those companies. But where do you imagine most of those businesses live? In small suites in multi-tenanted buildings. So it's great that legislation exists. But if one of those customers isn't supplied by an actual regulated supplier and is supplied by their landlord, then they don't have that direct relationship with a supplier to take advantage of some of those kind of protections. So again, that's one of the things that obviously we're bringing that kind of that extra layer of support. So things like that, I think you need to question kind of what's important. What can you get for every kilowatt hour that you're paying for in terms of added services.
Okay, excellent. So you mentioned net zero there, and obviously landlords up and down the country, across the region, are trying to reduce the operational carbon in their buildings. Embedded carbon is another issue entirely, and there's other podcasts in this series that address that. But in terms of operational carbon, landlords are trying to reduce the footprint, and that's the pressure is on them to do that. And what I want to ask you today and talk about today is if we're going about that the right way at the moment. Do you think that we're making enough progress in that sort of in that area? Are we doing the right things to try and reduce the operational carbon output of our buildings?
So I probably have multiple contradictory kind of responses to that question. I think the thing to do is to do something, to act, to try, and certainly there's a genuine intention across society and across the industry, to do something. But I do think that there's a lot of noise, and therefore we're not necessarily doing the right things, or overcomplicating things for ourselves. It sounds really silly, but reduce, reuse, recycle is still really applicable. We learned that in school kind of 30 years ago, and I think it's still really applicable. So the biggest problem that people have is that there's so much noise, there's so much talk about what you should do, what technology is out there, that people initially, they run and look for, what they can invest in, what next greatest technology, blue whale invention they can get their hands on to solve this problem for themselves overnight. And it's just not that simple. The first step that you need to take is data. So what are you using? Where can you reduce that? Is there any wastage? That's the sweet spot, right? That's the low hanging fruit. What can you do quickly, effectively, and sustainably to reduce any wastage? But the starting point for that is to establish what you are using. And I think a lot of people, if I take my example off, multi-tenanted buildings, and those occupiers don't have a relationship with their supplier, or maybe don't even have a meter. How, as a business, do you even start to reduce what you're using if you don't accurately know what you're using to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. So much to unpick from that. So bear with me. First of all, just an example from my work. So we receive press releases quite a lot that say, "Oh, this company wants to reduce its carbon output by X%." And the question is asked often back to them, "Well, how much do you use now?" And they don't know the answer. So that goes back to your point about data. How do you know how much you need to cut if you don't know how much you're using currently? So make the data available and make it easy to understand, I guess. On your point about the blue whale technology not being the answer, are you saying that we should, at this stage, because a lot of that technology is in the early stages, we should leave it for now and focus on more simple solutions?
So I can't kind of categorize everything or badge everything the same, right? That would be a bit silly. There's definitely technology out there that is worth investment, that's worth pursuing. I think my message is just to be a bit more realistic about what you're looking to achieve and what you can achieve, and look at those simple methods. And it's kind of horizons 1, 2, and 3, right? When you're developing a business, what are you doing today? What are you going to do in the immediate future, and what are you going to do in the long term? And I think it's just balancing those kind of 3 different stages at the same time. So I wouldn't advocate that we don't invest in technology or try new things, but I think there's a fine balance in terms of where we start.
Absolutely. And in terms of the reduce, reuse, recycle, from the perspective of an energy provider, which is where you're coming from, it may seem a little bit counterintuitive that you're encouraging landlords to reduce their energy footprint when that's how you make your money.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I think if you're looking short term and at a very transactional level, I can absolutely see that. But I think it's about who you are in the market, what you're bringing. So we're a supplier with a big differentiator, right? So we're not just supplying energy. We're supplying energy. We're distributing it for landlords in their building in a different way. We're supporting the occupiers. We're supporting kind of private wire, sub-meter infrastructure in those buildings. We're helping those landlords understand how they can sleeve, generation assets on site. So can they produce energy at the building level via solar or something like that? So we're providing that whole package. So for me, it's not just about the energy that we're selling to landlords. I think as well, this is about reducing wastage rather than necessarily reducing overall consumption. So electric vehicles, other types of kind of automation and technology, it's likely that our energy needs will increase, not decrease. It's just about making sure they increase in the right areas and decrease in the right areas as well. So if you need to improve the building fabric in a building, replace the windows, something like that, to reduce the amount that you're kind of leaking out of your building, then that's really, really positive. You might need to use more energy because you're installing EV chargers, in all of your car parking spaces. So it's one of those. It kind of swings and roundabouts. But I think for us, it's about doing the right thing, doing the most sustainable thing for society. And yeah, we're really committed to that long-term goal of making energy sustainable, easy to understand, and green energy accessible.
Okay, great. And on the back to the data point, if you were going to tell a landlord about the top 5 bits of data to pay attention to and to keep a watch on in order to moderate and modify energy output, what would you say are or maybe even just the top 2 or 3? What are the ones that they should be looking out for?
So for the easiest one to capture, which landlords will have a handle on, is what's actually coming into the building. So you can achieve that fairly easily. Your energy supplier will tell you that on the overall invoice. I think for landlords, what happens is there's unmetered energy in the building. So you've got various distribution boards. You've got all types of energy needs in a building. And if everything's not metered correctly, you just don't know what's being used where. So how do you attempt to reduce that if you actually don't know what's being used in different areas? The big one is occupiers. Landlords who don't have sub-metered infrastructure in occupier suites. They need to look to make that move over the next couple of years, because that's a big one, right? The majority of energy that a landlord's not using in the common parts will be used by the occupiers. A lot of landlords are making those moves, investing in that infrastructure, and that's great. Those things obviously cost money. They impact, how a landlord can sustainably kind of run that building. So, the industry, we at Unify Energy, we don't expect people to do that overnight, but it's definitely a sensible move to look to how you can kind of do that in the future. That would be the big thing. What are you using in a building overall? What are your occupiers using? And then, what's kind of wasted, what's unmetered, or what are you using that you don't need to? And that might be, you might want to take one step further with regards to that. So sensors, motion activation sensors for lighting, for example, so that you're not dependent on someone turning something off. There's all types of kind of lift technology that you can use that makes lifts more energy efficient. So there's lots of things that landlords can look at, but it all comes down to that data piece. So meters, basically. You want to meter everything you possibly can within an inch of its life.
Okay, excellent. And let's talk about the noise. They're cutting through the noise, because there is a lot of noise. Sustainability is so high on the agenda now that there's just so much sort of hubbub around it, and it's hard to unpick sometimes what's the right thing to do. So I wonder if you could give a few pieces of advice for people listening about, what are the things we should be listening to and what are the things we shouldn't be listening to in terms of the technology available and how to reduce your carbon footprint. Is there any examples you can give?
The biggest one is around green energy. So I am really passionate about green energy and about the general evolution that will happen to decarbonize the grid and to make more kind of green energy available. But because there's so much noise around NZC, and we're in danger of sometimes becoming an expensive, exciting marketing activity, right? So because all this noise and all this hype has been created, and people want to keep up with each other, right? So if somebody in one sector is doing something, their competitor wants to do something else. But again, it's what I said at the start. It's about being realistic. As a country, as a globe, we cannot become green overnight. If it was that easy, we would have done it already. And that my biggest bugbear in the industry is green energy marketing when it's not green. And that would be a big piece of advice for me when you, as a customer, are speaking to an energy supply company. Please do not take at face value that it's 100% green, but also please do not be put off if it's not 100% green. For me, it's much more important to dig down into the detail of how that supplier or that organization is going to become green, because that will be the authentic journey, and you will know whether the things that they are telling you they're going to do and they are doing are real or not. 100% green always makes me suspicious. About 40% max of energy in the UK, the whole UK is green today. So if you're constantly watching advertisement after advertisement of energy supply companies telling you that they're 100% green, something doesn't stack up, right? Because it doesn't exist in the first place for that to be the case. So that would be that's the biggest thing, to be honest. And that kind of false sense of buying into green, it derails the whole process, because if you are a corporate organization or a landlord or a domestic user at home, and you suddenly think you're buying into a tariff that's 100% green, well, kind of your job's done, right? You're buying green energy. It's not harming the environment, but it's much more complicated than that. So I think let's challenge ourselves and not just accept the easy response, because it's not always the real one.
How do energy providers get away with saying they have 100% green energy when that's not the case?
So unfortunately, there's a number of ways that energy supply companies can kind of abuse the system. I don't want to speculate as to who's doing what at an individual level, but mainly kind of that's done using REGO certificates. So these are certificates that are provided to renewable generators. when they generate actual green energy. But those certificates can be sold, and there is a kind of an open market where those certificates are sold. And then an energy supply company can essentially say, well, here's 1,000 kilowatts of energy, and here's 1,000 certificates that say that this is green. And, and it's called greenwashing. And that's basically how a lot of organizations do that.
It's fascinating because that's the first time I've heard that. About it because of the industry that you're in, but there's a lot of people who really should be aware of this, but it's just not common knowledge, and that's part of what we're trying to do with these podcasts, is sort of cut through the noise and give solutions and answers and look a little bit deeper. Let's move on then to the landlords and the building owners who have this headache about how to reduce the output of their buildings in terms of the use of carbon. I think one of their concerns is about striking that balance between reducing the carbon footprint and cost. This drive towards net zero is going to hit landlords in the pocket. What would you say to them in terms of how to mitigate against that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a huge cause for concern, not just for landlords, but for any corporate that's kind of, looking at this. There was some really interesting studies done by the Institute of Directors in terms of kind of CEOs and what they know about this, how comfortable they are, how bought in they are to kind of truly being green. And I think the commitment starts to waver when you start to weigh up being sustainable and the cost. But look, people are in business to make money, right? That's what makes the world go around. So we have to find a way for both of these things to be achievable. And the reality is that most of it's not achievable today. Being green, being sustainable generally costs you more money. And I think at the moment that feels very stark. That feels like a very stark reality. Because society has to catch up a little bit as well. Would you pay more for something if it's green or it's sustainable? Some people will, some people won't. We'll probably get to a stage where it's not societally acceptable, to do anything other than that. That will kind of allow the true cost of those green or sustainable solutions, to be costed in. In the interim, those execs, those leaders of those businesses have got big decisions to make to kind of, in good faith, speculatively make those decisions to kind of be part of the change. And it's really, really difficult. I think people are trying to do it. They don't always get it right. But like I say, I do believe that the intent is there. What I would say is resist the urge to do it overnight. Because that's what's going to really hit your pocket. And particularly if you're looking to invest in new solutions, new technology, that technology is going to change so rapidly over the coming years. We talk about NZC 2030. I don't even kind of dare to think about what technology will actually exist then. So I think do as much as you can, do as much as your business permits, be realistic, be pragmatic, take it back to the basics. What can you do kind of that doesn't cost anything, and kind of then do things gradually over time.
Do you think that some companies are dragging their feet on this point because they're waiting for prices of the green premium to disappear once there's enough buy-in from other companies, and then they'll just come in later down the line and sort of invest then when it's cheaper?
Yeah, so I think there's an element of that. And from a commercial perspective, if I forget the importance of sustainability for a second and just think about it in terms of the bottom line, you can't really kind of blame people for being hesitant, taking their time, kind of seeing how the market and products and technology evolves. From a commercial perspective, it's pretty smart. From a sustainability perspective, we can't do nothing. We have to do something. So it's kind of trying to find that balance. Now, there's lots of different areas of sustainability that are important. How products are made, what they're made from, how you build a building, what's in that building fabric, and how that building itself is kind of long-term sustainable from a net zero carbon perspective. But if I focus on energy, because that's kind of my area of expertise, there has been this kind of green premium that has prevented people from accessing truly green energy. The fact that we have greenwashing I don't like it, but I understand why people feel forced into kind of doing it. And I don't believe that they intentionally want to not be green, but customers don't want to pay for a green, they don't want to pay the green premium. So, people have found a way around it. And I'm not saying for a second it's right, because it's absolutely not. And we don't do it at Unify Energy. But I can understand why the situation has occurred that we're in. One of the really interesting things you asked me at the start about the week that we've had, the month we've had, the couple of months that we've had, this year from an energy perspective has been radical. We've seen gas prices increase by 250% since the start of the year. This is the biggest kind of energy, I don't want to call it a crisis, but this is the biggest kind of energy situation that has kind of occurred in the industry's history. But what's really kind of cool in a way about that is if you now compare the cost of generating green energy and you compare the cost of buying traditional commodity, at the moment, it's a bit cheaper actually to buy the green energy. So even if prices come down a little bit, kind of we think, none of us have a crystal ball, and even some of the best kind of trading managers, and I've got a pretty phenomenal one that works for us at UE, they've no idea how to predict what's going to happen next, because everybody's been wrong so far, right? It's been a catastrophe. But the feeling is that levels, when they do normalize and regulate themselves, they're probably not going to drop to the levels that they kind of were, let's say, this time last year. So if those prices kind of stabilize and levelize kind of slightly more than what they were last year, but lower than they are now, you might find a scenario where the capital investment to invest in these green technologies, green generation technologies, so solar, wind, hydro, and they will become more accessible because you're comparing them to what's available in terms of traditional commodity, and those two things will be more comparable, more competitive. So this is awful. What's happened? It's awful for the customers that have been affected, for the companies that are going under. It's not good, and I'm not suggesting it is, but there's just been this kind of ironic and interesting twist where it might be what the industry needed to remove that green premium that's stopping customers from buying into truly green energy, and shift that green energy piece forward a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you would hope then in turn investors elsewhere will invest more in green energy, create more of it, boost that 40% figure that you were talking about before. But we need that parity, don't we, in prices to drive that. Okay, brilliant. We're coming towards the end, but I just want to ask you about sort of targets going forward. There's so many targets. Environmental Agency has a 2030 net zero target. Manchester has a 2038 net zero target. UK Green Building Council wants all buildings to be net zero carbon by 2050. As you see it, as someone with a great amount of knowledge of energy and sustainability in this side of things, how realistic are those targets and how helpful are they?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was looking at something on social media from Greta Thunberg around the targets that are set. And it said something like, 2050, blah, 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 green vehicles, blah, blah, blah. And I find it quite funny and pretty realistic, actually, in terms of the world that I live in. I think the targets are necessary because you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. If you say, we don't know where we're going to get there, but we're just going to continually try, you're going to be less efficient, you're going to be less productive because you don't have that goal to hold on to. So personally, I think the goals are relevant, and I don't think it's a big issue necessarily that we have conflicting goals. So I've got a customer that has a 2025 goal, and we're not far off that. So 2025, 2030, 2050, 2038, whatever it is, it's a goal, it's a line in the sand so that you've got this impetus to kind of get there. And I think that overall is really positive. But from that perspective, I think then it's just about doing the right things, driving the right behaviors, looking at it practically, trying to make a difference. I also think it's really important that people try to do the right thing and worry about how they can tick boxes of some of these net zero programs afterwards, because sometimes that can cause a lot of confusion. So I think we need to genuinely just look at the right behaviors and activities that will drive our carbon down. The targets are good, like I say, just to have that kind of that little bit of pressure in the background in terms of kind of what you're working to. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of, we spoke earlier about behavioural changes. and monitoring data so that we can make those changes. Are the gains that we can make there in terms of reducing carbon big, or are they minuscule in the grand scheme of things? Is it worthwhile doing that, or should we just wait for this technology to come along?
Again, I think it depends on what way you're looking at it. At the moment, there's an overhead to being more green and more sustainable, and that's just the reality, right? So major kind of kudos to those that are carving out big chunks of budget to focus on this stuff, because the path's a bit untrodden and unknown at the moment. So they are pioneers, first movers, and I think that's great, and you always need those. I think you need to find that balance. I don't do that kind of in steps and stages. In terms of those monumental gains, even in terms of the bottom line, they will come at some point. There will be technologies that are more sustainable and drive better margins, and that's great, right? It's great for those two things to be so synergistic, because then it's a no-brainer. I think we just need to keep trying, and the for me, it's about breaking down those targets, understanding them, doing them because you understand them and you believe in them. Do not go out there and do things because you've signed up to some program and it says that you have to, and you've got this 2030 or 2050 target hanging over your head, but you don't really understand it and you don't really know why you're doing what you're doing, and actually some of it seems a little bit counterintuitive. Don't do that. Really stand back, look at your business, look at what you want to achieve, look at the impact that you want to have on society and on your colleagues, right? We have to make these things identifiable and to be able to be engaged with by everybody. So look at your carbon footprint per employee, and let them make that really, really tangible. Start to educate people. Funny, my trading manager and I were kind of talking about this, and I think there is a lot of info out there. I don't think the right signposting is there. He was saying that he often tells his mum about how it's really bad that she fills the kettle right to the top before she turns it on. And obviously he works in the energy sector and he knows how really bad that is. And he said, but I don't see that anywhere. I don't ever see anybody just telling people that that's the case. And it's a bit of a superficial point, right? And a very small point, but it's true. We need to be constantly reminding ourselves the impact of what it is that we're doing and the impact of our footprint, running competitions internally with colleagues to engage them. How much energy did you use, last month? Next year in the same month, can you reduce that? What are you doing differently? I think we have to get really, really creative, but there's no point in us striving for these big goals. Net zero is a big goal. There's no point in doing that if we don't take kind of society and individuals and people on that journey with us. And that's where we need to start. Engagement, taking people on that ride with us, simple metrics, make sure you understand what you're doing in the vision, and data. Where are you at now, and how are you going to measure where you're going moving forward?
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Baby steps will get us there in the end. Sarah, thank you so much. Fascinating insight into the reality of what's going on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.